Very kind. Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here. I've never been introduced by the president before as a baby or as an adult or any other kind. Wonderful to be here. As you heard, last year my Cigars got to come, and I did not get to come. I thought that's you take my cigars from me, and I don't even get the joy of being at the Napa conference. So I'm so pleased to be with all of you this year. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to all of you for tolerating the outrageously forced pun in the title of my remarks tonight. If you did not see it in your programs, it is Novo Millennial Ineunte, Young Adults Return to Rome. If you think that's bad, a riff on a JP2 encyclical, I promise you that it is much better than the titles I ended up rejecting. Those included Submitting to the Roman Pontiff is the New Black, as well as Fides est rad, yo. That last one is completely unforgivable. The puns are bad, but the phenomenon is very good. Young people are returning to the church. The numbers at this point are undeniable. The first sign of good news came in February when Pew Research reported that the decline in Christianity in the United States has slowed and perhaps has even leveled off. Pew first conducted the Religious Landscape Survey in 2007. This was at the height of the new atheist fad, Christopher Hitchens, all those guys. I'd found that some 78% of U.S. adults called themselves Christian. By the time Pew conducted its second such survey 7 years later, the number of self-identified Christians in America had dropped to 71%. The numbers just continued to drop significantly in these years that followed. For the past 5 years, however, it has remained relatively stable, between 60 and 64%. So it's a long road to recovery, but we have at least stopped the bleeding. We got to get back to 95%, which is what we used to be, but it's a good sign. Why has the decline in religion leveled off? The sociologists are scratching their heads. The analysts and the eggheads can't quite figure it out. Religion is supposed to decline into extinction. Why? How on earth could it possibly be stabilizing and perhaps even increasing? They consider every answer except for the obvious. Because it's real. Because its claims are true. Because it explains basic facts and universal intuitions about the world and our place in it. I should not beat up on the eggheads and the atheists too much. I myself was an atheist for about 10 years. I've never been an egghead, but I was an atheist. Even my wife and I, even my most hardcore Catholic friends and I, regularly have to remind each other of that fact. Some strange coincidence occurs, some implausible event, some little wink from Providence, some unexpected grace. And we marvel at it. We say, wow, can you believe that happened? Before one of us has to remind the other, yeah, because it's all real, so of course that would happen. That's just how it works. When I reverted to the faith after a decade of apostasy and atheism, the thing that most struck me was the abstract rationality of God. The proofs, St. Thomas's 5 ways, the realization that the existence of God can in fact be known with certainty from the created world by the natural light of human reason. Now, some dozen years after my reversion, what strikes me most is God's immanence. The fact that he's right here all the time, intimately involved down to the very slightest iota in everything that is. And I know that I'm not alone in this feeling. A college pal of mine, this happened recently, a college pal of mine was raised vaguely Jewish, we say, slightly, a little bit. He was somewhat agnostic in school. He became more conservatively religious in the years that followed. He was received into the church this past Easter. So good news. Somewhat surprising when he called me, but maybe it shouldn't be. Extremely intelligent guy. So I asked what did it for him. I said, what convinced you, despite all of the cultural factors that one would have expected to repel you from religion, and especially from the Catholic Church? So I expected him to cite St. Augustine or St. Thomas, Or at the very least, C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton? No, he told me. Numinous experience, mystical even. An overwhelming realization, which he told me with surprise and childlike wonder, that it's all true. That's it. All that schooling, all that book learning, all this, one of the most intelligent guys I knew in college. He said, oh, it's just all true, and I had an experience with our Lord, and I'm converting. That'll do it. My friend is a millennial, a group that I still flatter myself represents the youth. Though I am reminded with each gray hair that is added to my head by my toddlers that I am not, in fact, the youth anymore. Dante, in fact, opens the Divine Comedy with, in the middle of our life's journey, and Dante was a few months younger than I am when he appeared in that scene. Dante, by the way, did not come up with that timeline by himself. He gets it on good authority from King David, Psalm 90. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength 80, yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. That was a hard psalm to read when I turned 35 this year. I mentioned it to my father just before my 35th birthday. I said, Dad, I thought it was impossible, but I appear to have become middle-aged. And he assured me not to worry. He said, no, 35 is not middle age. You don't become middle-aged until you're 36. I said, good. Good. That's good. As a matter of filial piety, I think I have to side with my father over King David. So, not middle-aged yet. Okay. Regardless, the present religious revival that we're seeing does not hinge on the dubious youth of us millennials. The return to the church really is being led more by Gen Z, by our younger brothers. Barna Research Group reported in April that most Gen Z teens are interested in learning more about our Lord, and along with millennials, are leading the way in conversions, reversions, and a general return to religion. Better news still, the trend is not limited to the United States. A survey conducted by the Bible Society and by YouGov found, also in April, that 16% of British Zoomers attend church at least once a month. Now, that number seems a little bit weak to the people in this room, no doubt. That number is still 4 times the number of 18 to 24-year-olds who reported going to church at least once a month just 6 years ago. Why are the young, in particular, returning to church? That question, too, I think, is easily answered. The Zoomers were raised without religion. And for the sociologists who put their faith in the omnipotence of cultural trends, that fact should prove the demise of Christianity. But the problem with their analysis is that religion is not merely a social construct. It is a habit of virtue that inclines the will to give to God what he deserves, and God's existence is a fact, necessarily true at all times, in all places. No generation can ignore the eternal questions. The investigation of those questions on a long enough time scale and with enough seriousness of thought necessarily leads back to God's existence. All of that has been true since pagan antiquity. But we don't live in pagan antiquity. We live in our present moment in history. 2 millennia after the historical fact of God's self-revelation in the Incarnation, which means that we cannot remain content with the abstract God of Plato and Aristotle, men who in most ways knew much more than all of us, except for the crucial fact, pun very much intended. We know that Christ was born, was crucified, and according to some 500 eyewitnesses, according to the most reasonable thinkers ever since, was resurrected, which means that investigation of the eternal questions leads us back to the church, full stop. So now, a little under 1 in 6 Zoomers in the UK attend church once a month. But what will be even more surprising to those atheists and those secularists who consider religion to be the domain of old women, just church ladies. I love church ladies, by the way, but the church is about more than church ladies. What will surprise them is that the trend is being led by young men, more than 1 in 5 of whom report attending church at least once a month. The Pew study finds much the same, so it's not just an outlier poll. Zoomers might well be the first generation in American history in which the men are more religious than the women. This, too, should not surprise us. Men tend to lead things. Women have very important roles, too. The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. In fact, Catholics, the chief accusation that is made against us is that we worship a woman. So we certainly recognize the role of women and the contribution of women. But men tend to lead. This fact is politically incorrect, which is how you know it's true. It's true in business, it's true in politics, it's true in functioning households. It's just true. And it's true for better and for worse. For decades, men led the decline in religion. Now men are leading the return, which relates to another fact of this revival, a fact, once again, surprising to many modern people, which is that young people are flocking, when possible, to more traditional liturgy, up to and including, especially, the traditional Latin Mass. I say that young men relate to the trad trend because men are generally repelled by modern liturgy, and especially by the sappy, soft rock ballads that so often pass for modern hymnody. De gustibus non disputandum est, I understand that tastes vary, but I think I speak for most young men when I say that effeminate 70s ditties about eagles' wings, as well as the entire musical catalog of Dan Schutt, should be placed on an index of prohibited songs, the playing of which should be prohibited by life in prison at least. Is that too harsh? It's not harsh enough is what it is, really, yeah. I speak only for the young men. You're all speaking for yourselves and your various demographics. But it's not only the young men flocking to traditional liturgy when possible. Young women, veiled in mantillas often carrying multiple little babies, are showing up to standing room-only traditional masses as well. I see this in my own parish, which is bursting at the seams and where the median age is about 7 because they all have 1,000 children. And even if you take the children out of it, you just look at the adults, the median age is probably about 30, which backs up what we read in the surveys, and which is far younger than the median age in parishes that have chosen to align their liturgy with the spirit of the age. Now, I don't want to overstate the case. It would be wrong to say that young people, are flocking to the traditional Latin Mass. I have to condition that statement with the phrase, when possible, because there just aren't that many parishes in the country that celebrate the traditional liturgy for a variety of reasons. For many decades, the Mass that Catholics celebrated from the time of St. Gregory the Great until the late 20th century was needlessly suppressed. The late, great Pope Benedict XVI corrected that error in 2007, but in recent years, misguided bishops have once again sought to marginalize the Mass of the Ages. The irony, of course, is that these prelates barely finished speaking about the urgent need to bring the youth back to the church before they prohibit the Masses that the young people actually wish to attend. Very strange. Bishops will wax poetic about the need for a listening church, and then demand that the flock keep quiet when the sheep ask their shepherds for a taste of liturgical nourishment. Such strange prohibitions are not even limited to the Tridentine Mass. There are, of course, many parishes that reverently celebrate the Novus Ordo, but some bishops have preposterously discouraged tradition and reverence even in the new Mass. Communion rails, celebration ad orientem, reception of our Lord kneeling on the tongue, even the presence of Latin in the liturgy. None of those features is banned by the Second Vatican Council. Sometimes people allege that. It's not true. All of those features are permitted by Sacrosanctum Concilium. Some of them are demanded by the documents of the Council. But regardless, more important for our topic this evening, those are the features that young Catholics desire. A 2020 survey from 39 states concluded that the traditional Latin Mass is experiencing a high volume of participation and interest in the 18 to 39 demographic. Not only are young adults interested in the traditional Mass, not only are they exploring it, checking it out, but they are sticking around after they discover it. The survey found 98% weekly Mass attendance in that group, compared to just 25% weekly Mass attendance among young Catholics who do not attend the traditional Mass. The survey found that attending the traditional Mass is also associated with significantly higher likelihood of considering a priestly vocation. This is an important fact in a church that is suffering a vocations crisis. It found a whole host of other encouraging signs. But perhaps the most interesting finding is that only 10% of the people surveyed reported being raised in a traditional Latin Mass household. Only 16 of them were brought to the traditional Mass by their parents, which means that young people, when not impeded by their bishops and local parishes, are choosing the traditional Mass for themselves. Now, I don't mention all of this merely to advocate for the TLM, though I'm happy to do that ad nauseum, and I regularly do. But I'm not doing it merely to do that, really. My purpose here is not primarily prescriptive, but rather descriptive. I'm just telling you what young people are doing, what the surveys show, what we all can see with our own eyes. This is the future of the church. The Catholics who are not leaving the faith, the Catholics who are sticking around, and the ones who are coming back, laity and clergy alike, want tradition. Paradoxically, the future is the past. And it always has been, by the way, because the faith, as St. Augustine tells us beautifully, is ever ancient and ever new. Many people still cannot figure out why. Why are young people, many of whom were raised without religion, attracted to precisely the elements of religion that supposed reformers sought to stamp out? The actor Shia LaBeouf gave an instructive answer on this point. Many of you in this room have probably seen it. When asked why he, as a recent convert, loved the traditional Mass, he said it was because it didn't feel like the priest was trying to sell him something. What a beautiful answer. In a culture centered around the self, the cupio dissolvi of the priest in the traditional liturgy offers a rejuvenating contrast. In a culture obsessed with keeping us constantly entertained, it is refreshing when the priest takes his eyes off us for a moment and turns back toward God to lead all of us together in an act of focused worship. In a culture that exalts novelty for novelty's sake, it is inspiring to see a real beauty, which is not novel precisely because it transcends time. Every age has its problems. I don't want to sound nostalgic. A priest friend of mine says nostalgia is history after a few drinks. I don't mean to be nostalgic at all. Evil, falsehood, and ugliness are perennial facts of a fallen world. But our age has distinguished itself, not necessarily by its abundance of those ills, but by its ideological exaltation of them. It's one thing for a culture to proclaim the good of marriage when people sometimes commit adultery and divorce their spouses. That's one thing. It's quite another for a culture to proclaim that marriage is bad, to discourage marriage, even to try to redefine it. The former is just a fallen world. At worst, it's hypocrisy. The latter is a brave new world. That is the dystopia in which these younger generations were raised. And it is why, this is the good news, it is why they treat the good, the true, and the beautiful as a shocking and exciting new discovery. They're just not familiar with it. That's very, very exciting to discover that. And it is why they are returning in increasing numbers to the only place on earth where they can find those transcendentals in their perfection. All the church has to do is offer them their patrimony. Thank you very much.
All right. That was excellent, huh?
Thank you
Let's give it
very
up for
much.
Michael.
Very kind. Thank you. I've decided, because my eyes are a little weak, so it didn't matter to see everyone for the speech, but for the Q&A, I've put my Rachel Maddow glasses on so I can see everybody very well.
Well, should we all start with, and he will raise you
Good night,
up."
everybody.
Yeah. That's the fast way to get him off the stage. That was amazing, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and for being here tonight and teaching me that I am, in fact, a middle-aged man now. So that is,
I know.
that is fantastic.
It was a devastating realization.
That's right. That's right. So we have so many great questions for you tonight. We're going to try to get through as many as possible, and I'll try to group some together and get to the crux of a lot of these long questions. But one of the ones that we've gotten several iterations of is, why do you think women, it seems, are not being as drawn back to the faith, or particularly the traditional Latin Mass, as men?
Well, look, I think they are. So men are leading it, but I think the reason for that is men are just leading indicators. That's true in every industry. It tends to be, it could be any industry from manufacturing to film, and not to knock the ladies too much, but once the ladies started directing films, they all went downhill. Hollywood was totally dead. With the exception of Greta Gerwig, who is she's a crypto-Catholic, and all her movies are fantastic. But so I think it's just that. I think it's the fact that men tend to be the leading indicator. I don't think it has anything to do with women's piety or liturgical preferences. And really, when you get to some of the trad parishes, Trad Novus Ordo and the TLM, obviously, a lot of families, a lot of people looking to get married. One of the issues, though, friends have asked me, how to date and find a serious, like-minded Catholic. And I say, well, you can go to the trad parishes. The issue dating there is the odds are good, but the goods are odd. So you got to be prepared for that.
Well, I'm glad I got married before we started going to the traditional Latin Mass then, because I've been getting odder by the month. Yes. Another great question and a theme that's kind of arisen is we have some great momentum building. A lot of people see this as a new renaissance in the Catholic Church. What do we need to do to keep this momentum going, and what are the next steps to continue to build on this momentum?
Well, the important thing to do is to actually do it, to actually live it out in your own personal life first. So I was just recently chatting with a group of very young, 14 to 25-year-old, wide age range, but including teenagers, Christians broadly, heavily Catholic, some Protestant, but real revanchists ready to go conquer the Holy Land and slay the Saracens, and they're really ready for to go back to not to 2012 but to 1220, and I said to them, look, I love the memes. I love it. I'm not being facetious in any way. I love the memes. I share them. I love the Twitter apologetics. A lot of it's really interesting and legitimately edifying in my own religious growth. But I don't want to hear about it if you're not going to Mass at least once a week and you're not regularly availing yourself of the sacraments, and if you have a railing or reviling spirit, I don't want to hear about it. And it's like you got to really do it, because otherwise you will be a clanging gong, and then it'll be this fun fad. Hey, do you remember that moment when it looked as though everyone is going to return to the faith and orthodoxy in 2025, what a funny year that was. So you got to really build it in, and that takes a lot of different forms. One would be considering a vocation. One would be spitting out a new kid every 18 months or so at least. Really committing. A liberal society, a modern liberal society, hates commitment. You always want to be eternally young, eternally free, independent, so that every relationship and every endeavor is basically just a meaningless experience. But you have to commit to it, and you have to be willing to say, this is the hill. I'll die a Catholic.
You talked a lot about family and children and raising children. And even you and I were joking last week about how there's kind of been a race to see who can have more kids in a lot of Catholic circles. And I got to 3 under 3. Michael only had 3 under 4. So
he's bragging. He's bragging now, isn't he?
I know. But how do we continue that pro-family environment, and particularly in the church? And what can we do to, you touched a little bit upon this, but have our children or grandchildren, whatever it may be, continue to flourish as Catholics and as people, as individuals?
Something I've noticed that might not be expected from the outside is that often it's the more traddy kind of churches that have more screaming children. I mean, you'd expect them to have more children, but the ones that, even during the liturgy, the kids will be screaming, and maybe you wait a few seconds before taking them out, and you wouldn't expect that because you expect all the really conservative types to be uptight. But no, there's a paradox to that, because all those types know what it's like to be juggling 5 children at Mass, and they just have a little more grace on it. So I think, while it's very important to keep your kids in line and learn them some good manners, I think normalizing children crying on airplanes and in even in church is a good thing, because it reduces the anxiety about it. So that's part of it. And then at a broader political level, we have to displace the current understanding of the basis of the political economy, which is that we're all individuals and we're born primarily with rights rather than obligations, and the highest goal is to feel the most pleasure in an exalted kind of, what's the word for it? The word escapes me, and not having slept for a week. But, there's a kind of higher hedonism, and then there's the lower, baser hedonism of drugs and booze and carousing, but those are really the only options in modern society. And so I think we need to ban putting puppies in strollers. That needs to be fully outlawed. But that's for sure. That's not what strollers are for. And we need to, and we need, at a political level, we need a family policy that encourages people to have kids and keep having kids.
Welcome to California, the land of puppy strollers. So thank you for coming nonetheless. A lot of the questions we got were about when certain people are going to cross the Tiber eventually. And it sounds like a lot of this is being put on your shoulders, and maybe Matt Walsh's as well at the Daily Wire. But there's 3 names that popped up, and I want you to give us odds on if and when and how they will cross the Tiber, become Catholic. We have, and I'll just give all 3, and you can attack them in any order you want.
I bet I can name them with it, but no, you got it.
Ted Cruz?
Ted, no, I'm not going to say never. I mean, I love the man so much. And the thing about him is he's so curious. Because Senator Cruz is a Princeton debate champ who went to Harvard Law School and just loves nothing more than sitting with his friends and figuring out one area of disagreement and digging in. And I'll give you an example. He called me out one time because I mentioned to him that the book of the Apocalypse is understood as a mystical reading of the Holy Mass. Right? But that's kind of where I left it. This was not an idea that I'd really allowed to form properly in my mind, that I'd really availed myself of good writing on. And I was so stupid of me to do this with him, because Ted immediately says, "Oh yeah? How? Give me the verses. Give me the images." And I thought, "Oh man, this is my shot. I'm going to have to answer to St. Peter if I don't pull Senator Cruz across the Tiber." So it'll be tough. His dad is a Baptist preacher. That'll stick with you. But I don't know, maybe we can get them both. That'd be nice.
All right, number 2, and there was a little bit of movement this week on this gentleman, is Charlie Kirk.
I don't really want to tell tales out of school about, because, one has public conversations and one has private conversations. Well, hey, Charlie was talking about venerating Mary publicly, right? Yeah. I feel good about Charlie. Now, one impediment is he's going to have to admit that I was right all those years, and so that I don't want to be the impediment to it. I feel good, because Charlie is extremely capable. He's a very sharp guy, and he's an autodidact. So he has this very Protestant spirit in the sense that he wants to constantly question everything and knock over tables and tear down icons, but in this moment, that kind of a spirit of self-guided knowledge, of questioning everything, of tearing down the icons of our modern civilization, is leading people to Rome. And, Alexis de Tocqueville predicts this in Volume 2 of Democracy in America. He says that America seems kind of Protestant, but over time, it's going to move toward Rome, or it's going to give up religion altogether. And I think there are a few better analysts of America ever than Alexis de Tocqueville. And I think we're living in the culmination of that. And I feel good about Charlie.
And then finally, and you guys probably all know who's coming last, is our great Jewish friend, the great Ben Shapiro.
I've heard of him. I've had many conversations about religion with Ben over the years. Ben's another one where he got really, I guess I'm telling tales out of school, but whatever, I'm underslept, so I'm giving you all the tea. Ben got really into C.S. Lewis for a while, really liked C.S. Lewis. So that's good. Had Lewis lived, he obviously would have become Catholic. But then he got really into Thomas Aquinas. He was writing a book called The Right Side of History, which is kind of a summary of Western Civ. And he got really into reading Aquinas because he loves Maimonides. And so Aquinas is a kind of a natural companion there. But it would be tricky for Ben, because the Jews are a tribe. And because we live in modernity with our nation states and the Westphalian system where everything's liberal and abstract, we don't really appreciate the significance of being in a tribe. That would have been understood much more easily in the Middle Ages or in antiquity. But that said, plenty of great Jews have converted over the years, and Ben's a very smart guy, and Christianity's right, and we love him, and we want him to come over. So I'll keep working on him. Right. It's been 10 years now, but I'll keep working on him.
It'll take as long as it takes, won't it? Let's give some softball ones. Do you have devotions to any saints, and why?
Yeah, St. Thomas Aquinas. Because this is kind of a weird and embarrassing story. I apostatized when I was 13, right before my confirmation. And it was the height of the new atheists, and I was a punk kid, and I thought I was smart. And so I told my mother, I don't want to be confirmed. And she sort of rolled her eyes in her wisdom and said, you're going through a phase, and you will regret not being confirmed, so you should do it anyway. And so I said, okay, fine. And my mother was right. So I picked as my confirmation saint Thomas. But in retrospect, I don't know which Thomas I picked. Because I don't know if it was doubting Thomas, the apostle, or I liked the idea that St. Thomas Aquinas was this really smart guy. Of course, I hadn't read or understood a single word he ever wrote at the time, but I said either one of those. But then I realized, in Providence, Thomas, what does Thomas mean? Didymus means twin. And so I said, well, maybe I can get them both. I don't know if that's theologically sound, but... So anyway, yes, to those guys, Padre Pio. I have a first-class relic of Padre Pio in my home. Very blessed to have that. And I'd say those are kind of two of my main men. St. Anthony, a little bit. I could go on, but yeah, I would say those would be my top 3.5. It's technically 4, right? Yeah.
That's fantastic. And actually, this week, we have a representative from the Shrine of Padre Pio, and there's some first-class relics of Padre Pio at the conference this week. So
that's
seek
marvelous.
those out. Yeah.
I also should give a shout-out to St. Jean Vianney and St. John Henry Newman are also two of my main men out there, yeah.
So your top 3 saints are like 12 saints.
It's 12. We could go on.
That's awesome. Thank you. Here's an interesting question. Are you familiar with the phenomenon in the Muslim world of people who have never read the gospel that are having personal revelations or dreams of our Lord or Our Lady and have sought out baptism?
Yeah, I've heard about this. I don't know it directly. I haven't spoken to any of these Muslims. But I have heard about it now from multiple people. And it makes sense. I mean, I mentioned Dante earlier. Dante in the comedy considers Muslims as schismatics. He doesn't really consider it a different religion. It's just a schism because of the historical fact that Islam begins when Muhammad goes on a merchant trip with his uncle Abu Talib to Syria and encounters a heretical monk, probably a Nestorian monk. And that's the beginning of it. So then, Christ features into the Quran, is as intelligible as it is if anyone's tried to read the Quran. But of course, the Quran denies the crucifixion. It's very interesting. The Jews deny the resurrection, and the Muslims deny the crucifixion. But we read St. Paul. St. Paul says, many are walking now, and I tell you, even weeping, who deny the cross of Christ. Interesting prophecy or prediction of Islam. But because of that, it is just a Christian heresy. And it also tells you why it's important to stamp out heresy. Maybe some of those medieval popes had it right. But because it's a heresy, one could see it being a little easier to bridge the gap. Obviously, Islam then fell into other errors like voluntarism, and Pope Benedict wrote beautifully on this in the great Regensburg Address, and where he quoted Ibn Hazm and said that the God of Islam is totally transcendent, not identified with logic, such that if he told his followers to worship idols, they would have to do so. So there are, I don't mean to downplay the theological differences, but I just mean because it's obviously a product of an erroneous view of Christianity, one could see it, look, I mean, our Lord and Our Lady can do whatever they please, but one could see it being an easier leap.
This is a pretty long question, so I'll get to the actual question, which is really beautiful. Can the re-enchantment of the West begin at the altar?
It has to. It has to. I mean, without question. I mean, that's one of the brutal facts of modernity is just disenchantment. Was it Chesterton who said, the world will perish not for lack of wonders, but for lack of wonder, which certainly we see. Also, just in the political order now, there are, well, I'll just speak on the right, which is where I spend most of my time thinking. There are kind of three views of a way to have a political order. One was very popular in the late 20th century, which is the notion that America is a purely creedal country. It's a propositional nation. Doesn't really have anything to do with geography or people or traditions or habits. It's just, read a few lines of John Locke and you're an American or something. And then there's a more nationalist view of America, blood and soil or something. And often these are pitted as the only two options. But of course this ignores the third and correct view of politics, which is throne and altar. Not just some floating idea, not just blood and soil, but throne and altar. And that's the only way to have a political order because it's based on something that is really metaphysical. So the re-enchantment of the West, not merely as a nostalgic concept, but as a civilization that thrived. Well, when did it really thrive? When was the peak? It was the High Middle Ages. There have been some improvements since then. Medical care, I guess, is somewhat improved, although I don't know. Then I hear Dr. Fauci, I think maybe it hasn't improved at all. But the height was the High Middle Ages, and back then we didn't call it the West. What did we call it? We called it Christendom. So it's not going to be re-enchanted on Netflix. It'll be re-enchanted at the altar.
And speaking of the political culture, a lot of people have turned their politics into their religion. Yeah. How can we undo that outside of the simple answer, making religion our religion? What are some steps that we can take as a culture, and especially as Catholics, to maybe pry especially fallen Catholics, back into the faith so that the politics is not the end-all, be-all of who they are?
Well, the error of confusing politics and religion is not an error of combination, it's an error of reversal. So a lot of times the rejoinder to that will be, we need to keep politics in the political lane and religion in the religious lane, which is completely ridiculous and actually impossible because, as Cardinal Manning tells us, all politics, all human conflict ultimately is theological. So I'm cribbing this idea from someone, but I forget the name of the author, so forgive me. But, practical politics rests on practical morality. Remember that line that people were saying for a while, you can't legislate morality or whatever. That means just insane. You're passing a law about the death penalty. You don't think that involves moral reasoning? You could pass a law about taxes or jaywalking. It obviously involves moral reasoning. So that rests on a practical morality, which rests on a broader abstract morality, which rests on a lot of other things, namely, epistemology, anthropology, ontology. But when you get through all the ologies, where are you going to end up? You have to end up with theology. You have to end up at the unmoved mover. So you can't avoid religious questions. It's just that some people make an idol out of some stupid policy or something. I don't mean to diminish it. Policies matter and they affect people's real lives. But if your political view is not based on the source and summit of all truth, then it's going to go wrong. I mean, this is really clear when you think of the universities. The universities purport, and John Henry Newman made this critique better than I will, but the universities purport to be centers of universal knowledge. And yet they now, at best, most of the time ignore God, and more often deny God. So you just, in principle, from the beginning, you're purporting to universal knowledge. You're ignoring the source and summit of all knowledge. You're wasting $250,000 is probably what you're doing. And the same is going to be true of your politics. Catholics should not run away from politics. They should just put politics in its proper place.
Well, we're going to do 2 more questions, and then we're going to end with something fun. And it won't be singing on Eagle's Wings, I promise.
Yeah, that's okay. I was warming up.
First question is about our new Pope. I think there's a lot of optimism across the political and Catholic spectrums about Pope Leo XIV. What's your take on Pope Leo? Are you optimistic? Are you cautious? A little bit of both? And how do you think his papacy will affect the resurgence of the traditional Latin Mass?
I'm not cautious. I'm super into it. I think it's great. I love it. It's great. It's great. I love it. I could be, look, we've all been burned before, but I just feel great about it. I called the name because, one, I really wanted the name. This was my ideal name for this pontificate, Leo XIV, for the same reasons that he chose it, because of Leo XIII. I know some of us were itching for a Pius XIII. It's not happening anytime soon, okay? We need time, patience. Urban maybe would have been nice, but it's okay, in time. So I thought the name was a great sign right away. And then the Mozzetta I thought was a great sign. The Augustinian I thought was a great sign. The Salve Regina in Latin was a great, it's just on and on. The Royal We is a great sign. I just think I'm dizzy with great signs. And really the only negative sign was one errant tweet where then the then Cardinal sort of criticized the vice president, which I thought was had other explanations beyond a clear articulation of the Pope's theological views. So I felt great from the beginning. Every day gives me more and more hope. I think what's funny is a lot of the things that people, myself included, are so excited about is that he seems like a normal pope, which is great. I'll leave it at that. It's great. That's great.
Now, in a few minutes, we're going to go across the lawn and smoke some delicious and beautiful Mayflower cigars.
Yes.
And I know you were telling me a bit about the design of the logo of Mayflower and how there's a lot of great Christian and Catholic imagery in there. I was wondering if you could speak to the Catholicity of your cigars.
You want me to give, this is real secret. This is, nobody tells the Daily Wire this. I was dealing with a lot of Protestants when we were starting this, and they're not going to, because... Well, let me tell you about a thinker by the name of Leo Strauss. So, there's this thinker, Leo Strauss, who has this theory of esoteric writing. So there's the exoteric meaning of the great thinkers who are persecuted throughout all of history by the powers that be. And then there's the esoteric meaning. And they have interplay with each other. So Mayflower is a Protestant ship. It happens to be one that on my father's side, my ancestors came from. And on my mother's side, it was a sardine boat, but on my father's side, it was the Mayflower. And I'm sure my ancestors are spinning in their grave, seeing the potpourri from their descendant. But this was the design. It's actually a Mayflower type. The design was a triangle upside down. That was put on Mayflower 2, which was a recreation of the ship. Then the Mayflower, the actual flower itself, and then different colors. So I said, okay, I'm going to take that symbol, because I want this to be about the Mayflower. This is patriotic, it's a little bit elevated, but it's also salt of the earth, it's accessible luxury, it checks a lot of boxes. I wanted this to be an American cigar, but I didn't want it to be, like guns, bullets, and pigskin cigar. There's a market for that too, but I wanted this to be a little more sophisticated. So I said, I love all of it, but I need it to be a little Catholic. So you'll notice for the Dawn and the Dusk, the color scheme for our 2 first cigars is black, white, and red. Is the color of the steps in Mount Purgatory in Dante in Purgatorio. The blackness of sin, the red of satisfaction, and the white of innocence. Then we flipped the logo so that the triangle points up. It looks like little tobacco leaves, but the triangle points up. It's a sign of the Trinity. But then this is the really subversive one. Shh, don't tell. The flower looks like a Mayflower, but it looks even more like a Jacobite rose. We're always plotting, like Guy Fawkes, we're always plotting to take over the entire political order. And we're not going to blow up, kegs of gunpowder, but we will light up these cigars and puff them, and that will be a kind of honor and effigy for it. Yeah.
Well, we're just about out of time, but here at the Napa Institute, we love our attendees and our friends and all the apostolates, so we also occasionally like to do some really nice things for them, and there is a little bit of a favor here, and I'll give you this card, and maybe you can help this person with this favor.
Yes. Can I please wish? You know I can. Are they in the house right now?
I have no idea.
I have no idea. Okay. Well, Tyler Howe and Claire Freeman, are you here? No. I'm doing a favor for someone who didn't even bother. They're smoking cigars on the lawn right now. Well, anyway.
We'll get them the recording.
Tyler and Claire, I'm wishing you a very blessed wedding on September 13th, 2025. Very exciting. I assume my invitation is in the mail. I will look out for it. But in the meantime, I hope you have good planning, not very stressful, and I hope you have a blessed day.